She teaches and she does research at the university. She gives talks to groups like ours on the role of early experience in shaping brain development. So that could be another talk for us. We could have her talk about the role of moms. Okay, and dads. All right, Dr. Gibb is a member of the Early Childhood Education Advisory Committee for the Lethbridge College and Alberta Learning and Child Care Curriculum Advisory Committee. Let's give a warm welcome to Dr. Robbin Gibb.
Thank you, Bev. A delight to be here this morning. As you hear, my research is really focused on early experiences and how that influences brain development and outcome through the lifespan. I'm a woman who's gone through menopause, and it has been something that was tricky for me, and I hope that with our current knowledge of how hormones influence the brain and how the brain changes when your hormones diminish, I hope that this information can help some of you who are just experiencing that journey. I am thrilled to see Dr. Roger Rampling here today, and as he came and introduced himself to me, I had to share that my daughter saw him while she was going through her journey of hormones. She had PMDD, 6 little kids, and really struggling with her life, and he, with his hormone therapy, completely changed that. And so I owe a debt of gratitude to this man, and now that she's going through menopause, the hormones have continued to sustain her and manage her mental health as well as her physical health. And so honestly, with good care, we can get through it and have a healthy and fulfilling life. Okay, so the menopausal brain. I'm going to tell you a lot of information here, and there's a lot. This is a talk that is not one I typically give, so I put a lot of information on the slides, and I will give this presentation to Bev, and if any of you are interested in having it, you can just contact her, and you're welcome to it. So essentially, I scan the literature from 2025 on to find out what the latest and greatest news is about menopause and the brain. Okay, so why menopause matters? Well, let's think. 50% of the population will be directly affected by menopause, and many more are indirectly affected. So when we're going through menopause and we have these out of sorts kinds of experiences, it's not just us who are suffering with those experiences, but all of the contacts.
That keeps falling off. Oh, it's all good.
All of our contacts could also be suffering. So I do think it is a widespread problem, and we need to pay more attention to it. Okay, very good. So we know that right at the moment in Canada, there are about 5 million women between the ages of 45 and 54, and that is the sweet spot for this transitional journey. There's also an unknown number of transgendered individuals who do not identify as women. So there's additional people who we are not including in those statistics. In women, about 1/3 of your life is postmenopausal, and that's a lot. And so it is affecting multiple brain systems, it's affecting multiple body systems. And brain symptoms will often precede the physical symptoms that you have. So why is this important? When we look at the menopausal studies in neuroscience, only 3% of neuroscientific studies examine female health. So, yeah, exactly. And only 0.2% look at menopause. So we know so precious little about how menopause is affecting brain systems. We need to invest. So this really does highlight that we are understudied, we are undervalued, and we are underfunded when it comes to trying to manage this. So I just have a little picture here of testosterone at the top, estrogen at the bottom. You can see how closely related these two molecules are. Just a little CH3 group missing on one of those rings. But if we look at estrogen as a brain hormone, it supports synaptic plasticity. Synaptic plasticity is fundamental to learning. It promotes neurogenesis, and we get new neurons in parts of our brain that are fundamental for memory. And it supports neurotransmitter systems, and we'll talk about that. It also protects against inflammation and oxidative stress, so it has a wide range of effects. So I just wanted to bring this slide up because I use it when I talk about brain development. But what is key on this slide is that women or biologically female individuals have sex-determining genes that release gonadal hormones, and they affect our brain in our embryonic period, in our neonatal period, in puberty, and as adult. In any one of those phases, when we have changes in our hormones and their presence in our body, and so if they go up in puberty, we have vast changes in our brain as a result of that, because we have so many receptors for these hormones in our brain. Likewise, when a mother delivers a baby, her brain is flooded with hormones that bond her to her baby. Oxytocin, all kinds of hormones that are changing her relationship with that newborn. All right, but we go through another phase, and that's when we lose our hormones, and our brain undergoes vast changes again as a result of that. So males and females have different expression of gonadal receptors throughout their brain, and it really does matter what the state of your hormone expression is and how many of these various systems are affected. So in this little diagram, we'll come back to that, it actually gives us functional differences in our brain plasticity and the way our brains function. So when we lose these hormones, we're affecting those systems just as importantly as when we gain hormones in puberty or when we just deliver a baby. So there's many, many different kinds of menopause, and this adds to the whole gambit of trying to understand how you can best treat women who are going through menopause. So there's something called early menopause, and that happens if you're between the ages of 40 and 45. Premature menopause is before age 40. And then we have spontaneous menopause further down the list. That's between 45 and 55. Now, in all of these kinds of menopause, it's a gradual decline of hormones. So gradually, you're losing the hormones, and gradually systems are shifting. But if you've had chemically induced menopause, and this can happen if you have endometriosis and you're being treated for it, it can reduce your gonadal hormones. And as a result of that, within a couple of weeks, you're losing your hormone. But also some chemotherapy causes loss of these hormones. And of course, you can have surgically induced menopause when you have removal of the ovaries. And those kinds of things are abrupt changes in your expression of hormone. When the changes are abrupt, the symptoms are generally much more dramatic. So age of onset is also related to the severity of the symptoms. If you start menopause very early, or that between premature, before age 40, these women typically have more issues with symptoms than if you start menopause more in the traditional range of between 45 and 55. Okay, so where are estrogen receptors found? Pretty much everywhere in your body. So ovarian aging leads to all kinds of symptoms, and it varies from person to person. So a one-size-fits-all therapy strategy does not work. Just because your friend is doing this and that and it's working for them, you may think you can go to your doctor and ask for exactly the same thing, but it may not address your symptoms. So it really needs to be carefully thought through. You have to have the opportunity to share what the history is, what your symptoms are, in order to adequately address these things. And a host of treatments should be available for each and every one of us to address those individualized symptoms that we have. So where are these receptors found in the brain? Well, in the hippocampus. This is our center for learning and memory, and it's also how we find a car in the parking lot. So yeah, if you are having trouble with that, it could be those receptors not getting the estrogen that they were anticipating. Prefrontal cortex. So the prefrontal cortex is responsible for our executive function system. We do know executive functions diminish as we age, and one of the reasons they do is because our hormones have shifted.
I don't know about you, but I remember going through this phase in my life where I suddenly thought, this really pisses me off, and I'm going to say something. You know what that is? It is a loss of executive function. Because you would typically just hold that in your mind and not say it out loud. But when you feel you have the right to tell everybody how mad you are about something that really doesn't matter, that is a loss of executive function, okay? So I study executive function systems through the lifespan and now working with the seniors community as well. And we're working on trying to restore these things. It looks as though one way you can help is making sure you have your hormone levels addressed, okay? We also know that the amygdala has a lot of gonadal hormone receptors, estrogen receptors, and it is our emotional center. So think about what you go through when you're doing that menopausal journey. Emotions are labile. It actually reminds me a lot of teenagers. They have a lot of the same experiences. So they're up one minute, down the next, and you can't even imagine why you're feeling so sad, but you know you're feeling sad. That's amygdala and some of the loss of those hormones in that area. We also have brainstem and hypothalamus showing a large number of these estrogen receptors. This is where our heat regulation happens. This is where our weight set point is managed. So when you go through menopause, a lot of women find that they're gaining weight, eating the same foods they've always eaten, and doing the same sorts of exercise, and it just doesn't seem to matter. But partly it's because loss of that hormone is leaving those systems unmanaged. And so I want to just give you a little bit of detail because this shows there is some hope for estrogen therapies making a difference without actually causing problems with cancer. So one of the reasons, and actually before the year 2000, there was a lot of women doing hormone replacement therapy, but then a big study was done, and it suggested that if you were doing hormone replacement therapy, it didn't really help with the cognitive symptoms, and it increased your risk for cancers. And so breast cancer in particular. So women dropped it, and they stopped doing this hormone replacement therapy because they believed that it wasn't going to resolve their issues. That unfortunately was a misguided study, and I don't have time to talk about it, but that study really changed how women were embracing hormone replacement therapy. And it turns out that there are two kinds of estrogen receptors that are of real interest. There is an estrogen receptor alpha and an estrogen receptor beta. Estrogen receptor alpha does promote cancer progression if you have cancer in the uterus, in breast, and ovaries. But activation of estrogen receptor beta actually inhibits cancers in those very areas, as well as seems to improve all sorts of cognitive symptoms. So now that they've discovered that there are these two kinds of receptors, there's active promotion of finding drugs that will interact exclusively with the estrogen receptor beta, and as a result of that, just provide you with protection from those cancers, but also improve all of the cognitive symptoms that come along with menopause. But we have another hormone that we shouldn't forget because progesterone is our friend. Progesterone also declines during menopause and contributes to brain fog, sleep disturbances, and heightened anxiety, but you have to get the dosing right. Too much can make you sleepy or irritable, but there are key brain benefits for taking progesterone. It is calming. It interacts with GABA receptors, which are inhibitory receptors that actually help keep you in a more peaceful state. It actually aids with myelination and repair and supports neurogenesis, the building of new neurons in your brain in those areas like important for memory, like hippocampus. It protects from injury. It's naturally an anti-inflammatory and an antioxidant. It also stabilizes the blood-brain barrier after injury. So after something like stroke or concussion, progesterone can make a huge difference for recovery. It also helps maintain our verbal memory and our overall cognitive function. So there's multiple types of estrogen receptors, and I didn't even want to get into it because they're so complex. They are distributed throughout the brain. Type and number do depend on brain region and cell type and your hormonal status as well. They're expressed again in amygdala, our emotional center, hippocampus, our learning and memory center, thalamus, which controls our sensory integration, frontal cortex, executive function, nucleus accumbens, our reward system. Things that you no longer find rewarding may be a result of losing your hormone and not having activation of those systems, and hypothalamus again for regulation of temperature and those sorts of things. So this picture just shows where we have a high distribution of estrogen receptors in our brain. The blue areas are where we have our estrogen receptors. Those are also areas in our brain where we have higher cortical volume than males. The pink areas are where males have a higher cortical volume than females, and those are full of testosterone receptors. So how does estrogen function in the brain? It modulates the expression of serotonin, which we know is really critical for mood regulation. It also is involved in the mesolimbic dopaminergic system for dopamine and motivation in the reward system. And it's important for learning. It actually modulates glutamate, which is a key neurotransmitter for learning. And it helps with our stress regulation by modulating the effects on the HPA axis. So as far as mood goes, we have higher risk of anxiety and depression through menopause because mood changes are linked to our serotonergic systems and our stress systems. And these symptoms will vary widely across individuals. We know estrogen supports glucose metabolism in the brain, and when we have reduced estrogen, we have reduced brain energy efficiency. And those metabolic changes can emerge with hormonal loss, and they can contribute to the cognitive changes that we see with menopause. So with reduced estrogen signaling, we have altered brain energy metabolism, we have changes in connectivity and brain plasticity throughout the brain, cardiovascular consequences with plaque buildup in our veins, which can lead to stroke, and increased vulnerability to inflammation, which accelerates cognitive decline, impaired memory, neuronal loss, and increased risk of Alzheimer's disease and Parkinson's disease. So our common menopausal symptoms: hot flashes, night sweats, sleep disturbances, mood swings, vaginal dryness, weight gain, fatigue, joint and muscle pain, osteoporosis, deficits in memory, attention, concentration. We have slower processing speed. It takes us longer to work through what somebody's just told us. Word finding problems, and believe me, I get this occasionally in front of my class of 250 students. I'm trying to explain a phenomenon and I think, what's the word? What's the word? And often they just provide it for me. Anyway, those kinds of things are referred to as brain fog. And my own personal experience, this is why I went to my doctor, was I found that when I was teaching these large classes and having a hard time finding the words I wanted to use to tell them about how the brain works, it's kind of limiting with this kind of teaching. So I went to my doctor and I insisted something had to be done, and she said, "Robbin, I'm not sure because you know the cancer risks." And I said, "You know what? I need this to work because I'm standing in front of a big audience of enthusiastic young people who'd like to know how the brain works, and if I can't explain it to them because I can't figure out what the words are, that's not going to work." And also, I just had an experience where I was supposed to be teaching a class for someone else, and I agreed to do it. It was a class of 400 students, and I got busy making heart sandwiches on Valentine's Day for my grandchildren and forgot to go. So all of these students are waiting to hear about how important parents are in shaping brain development, and I'm in my kitchen making heart sandwiches. And they phoned me and said, "Are you all right?" And I said, "Yeah, I'm all right." And they said, "Well, why aren't you here?" I thought, oh my God, I made the talk up the night before. And I completely forgot that that was what I was supposed to be doing. So that really was the kicker that made me go and get those hormones. Happily, I got them early enough that they worked extremely well for me. My doctor just a little while ago told me I should get off of them because I don't need them anymore. I just had a little conversation with Dr. Rampling, and he said, "You should get back on them." So I can hardly wait to go back and see her. So these symptoms, hot flashes, can last upwards of a decade. I just heard from someone 22 years. They're still suffering. these kinds of symptoms. When you have these symptoms, it is associated with increased risk of cardiovascular disease and stroke, hypertension, mood disorders, cognitive dysfunction, and Alzheimer's disease. But there's other menopausal symptoms as well. Tinnitus, where you hear that ringing in your ears, burning dry mouth, dry eyes, mucoskeletal problems like arthritis and itchiness. And remarkably, it turns out that our education level, our socioeconomic status, and our working status influence the severity and the type of symptoms that are reported through menopause. So culture has a huge impact on what you'll say is bothering you and what you'll say isn't. And honestly, I think many of us we just take it as something we have to deal with and don't bother sharing what it is that we're struggling with. So they can have profoundly negative impacts on health and livelihood. Women whose menopausal symptoms go untreated report deteriorated quality of life, and none of us need that. Increased anxiety, depression, and stress, greater health care costs, more physician visits, lower work productivity. Brain fog is common. Up to 87% of women say they have it. And it's usually mild, but it can vary. And honestly, some days you're good and other days not so good. It's not the same as dementia. So keep that in mind. And it is something you can treat. There's multiple contributing factors. Sleep disruption is one of them. Stress and cortisol levels changing, another. Hot flashes and night sweats contribute to the sleep disruption, and then we have those hormonal fluctuations. I just put a little diagram up there. In the rat brain, when we have high estrogen, we have more connections on the neurons in our hippocampus that are involved in learning and memory. When we have low estrogen, those actually diminish. So it cycles with our menstrual period. And when you've lost estrogen, you're forever losing those connections in that learning center in your brain. So hot flashes are also known as hot flushes or night sweats. They're intense, often sudden, transient, and they produce a rise in your body temperature followed by vasodilation, so you get sweating, and it's an awful, awful experience. They can last from seconds to an hour, and they're really embarrassing when it happens during the day. When you get your stress systems up, you're going to have these hot flashes, and then you really can't think, and it's really hard to manage. So people who suffer from them tend to suffer at least 7 to 11 years, and your activities can be significantly affected. When we have increased frequency and severity of these hot flashes, we have increased memory dysfunction, slower processing speed, altered brain activity, and we start to see the plasma markers for Alzheimer's disease. They're associated with lower life satisfaction, lower self-esteem, increased binge eating, and increased depression. The big deal here is hot flashes fragment sleep, and sleep disruption impairs memory and attention. And during sleep, we activate what we now know is the glymphatic system. And the glymphatic system is a system that is activated during our sleep that allows cerebrospinal fluid to flush through our brains and take out the garbage. And if you are having disrupted sleep, the garbage doesn't get taken out. It gets left in your brain, and it can cause problems. We do know that people who suffer from Alzheimer's disease tend to have massive sleep disruption, and as a result of that sleep disruption, the garbage isn't being taken out. It also amplifies our stress response, which makes all of this that much worse. We know that chronic stress affects our cognition, and it causes inflammation that contributes to the brain system, so stress management does help support our brain health. And women represent about 2/3 of all Alzheimer's disease cases. Now, interestingly enough, women have an ability, if there is a protein called alpha-synuclein, which is found in Parkinson's and Alzheimer's, in women, if you have those proteins, it amplifies the signal and creates a progression of more and more of these proteins forming in your brain. It doesn't happen in men. Now, this is even after you lose your hormones. So I'm not exactly sure how it is amplified in women to that extent when estrogen is reduced in our brains.
What's the protein name?
It's called alpha-synuclein. Yeah. And so that may be why so many more women are expressing Alzheimer's disease, because we have this trigger, and estrogen seems to be, or having had estrogen seems to be a trigger for this. So hormonal changes do contribute to the risk. So factors that increase risk of Alzheimer's disease, that early menopause or surgical menopause, cardiovascular disease also increases the risk. Sleep quality is huge. And then your genetics can also contribute to whether or not you may develop Alzheimer's disease. So hormone therapy is used to supplement or decline in ovarian hormones during menopausal transition. Sometimes it's estrogen only, sometimes it's estrogen plus progesterone. You can take it orally, you can take it through the skin. Serum testosterone levels remarkably remain relatively stable through perimenopause. So we're all producing testosterone even as women, and that stays up. And so this is often where women start to experience hair loss and other kinds of things as a result of those enduring testosterone levels without the estrogen. But if you have low testosterone, it also reduces your sex drive. So again, treatments have to be individualized. This little diagram is just illustrating that we can have a thriving brain, or we can have a brain that's languishing, or somewhere in between. So we have to consider the kinds of menopause that you're going through, and then consider the therapies, route of administration, type of hormone, combinations, time of initiation, how long you're going to take them. All of these things can contribute to what the trajectory for your brain outcomes are. So timing matters. If you take it closer to a loss of hormone, it seems to have greater benefit, but Dr. Rampling just told me that even if you take it having never had it when you're 80, it can still provide some benefit. So I'm embracing that good news. Type and route matter. So I have heard one of the latest recommendations is having a hormonal IUD for progesterone, and then having an estrogen transdermal patch. And that was told to me by a psychiatrist who I had the opportunity to work with out of Utah. And she said, honestly, I'm going to die with my patch and with my IUD. So benefits and risks, again, differ between individuals. Early intervention may be protective, but we need more studies. We have to understand long-term cognitive effects. We have to understand optimal timing and dosing. So really need that personalized medical approach. So the good news with menopause is your brain remains plastic. You can still learn things, and often your symptoms do improve over time, even without the help of replacement therapy. Lifestyle interventions can make a difference. So in the meanwhile, while you're trying to figure out what to do, you engage in a healthy lifestyle. Exercise is critical, watching your diet, getting enough sleep, making sure your heart and your cardiovascular health is as good as it can possibly be. Managing stress is huge, and engaging in lots of social connection, and making sure that when things are bothering you, you stand up and do that political activism like Bev is doing, honestly. These kinds of things can make a difference. So it is a neurobiological transition. Brain symptoms are common and they are real. The brain remains adaptable, and our knowledge will support our proactive brain health. So that's it. That's what I have to say.